I'm Emily Carter, 24 years old, and I spent 4 years at the University of Washington studying by day, grinding by night, earning a full scholarship, and working in an AI research lab, all in the hope that my parents would be proud of me on my graduation day. But that morning, when I texted to ask, "Where are you guys?" the reply left me frozen. "We're helping Sarah move into her new apartment. Your sister needs us more." The 3 VIP seats I had reserved stayed empty for the entire ceremony, surrounded by hundreds of cheers and bouquets of flowers meant for other people. I thought I would walk out of there like someone who had just been left behind, until the dean smiled, took the microphone, and said, "We are honored to announce the AI software developed by Emily Carter has been licensed by Microsoft for $2.5 million. The entire hall stood up in applause, cameras panning straight to me, and I just sat there, smiling calmly, while inside me was a storm of emotions. Have you ever felt abandoned by your own family at the most important moment of your life? And where are you watching this story from? Leave a comment below so I know I'm not alone. I was born and raised in a small town over an hour's drive from Seattle. On paper, my family looked no different from any other middle-class American household: a 2-story light blue house with a wide porch, a small backyard garden, and an old apple tree by the wooden fence. But inside those walls, things were never as balanced as they appeared. I was the firstborn, and 3 years after I came into the world, Sarah arrived. From the moment she was born, the balance in our family tilted to one side, and that heavier side was never mine. Sarah was the golden child in my parents' eyes. From a young age, she was always praised for being cute, lively, gifted, simply because she could sing a children's song or draw a simple picture. Whenever guests came over, my mother would call Sarah out to perform, handing her a small guitar or a box of crayons, and then lean against the doorframe, smiling with pride. I would usually sit on a chair in silence, feeling both jealous and hurt, but never daring to speak up. I was never called out to show off anything, even though my test scores were always the highest in my class. My parents would say, "Emily, if you're good at something, keep it to yourself. There's no need to brag." That difference became painfully clear when I hit my teenage years. On my 16th birthday, which fell on a weekend, I had hoped the whole family would go out to dinner at my favorite restaurant, a small, charming place by the lake, where I had always dreamed of wearing a nice dress, blowing out candles, and taking a few family photos. But that afternoon, my mother got a call from Sarah. She was crying, saying she needed a new dress for her best friend's birthday party the next night. Without a second thought, my mom and dad abandoned the birthday cake still baking in the oven, told me to push the party back a few hours, and drove Sarah into the city to shop for a dress. Those few hours stretched into late evening, and my birthday turned into a cold cake on the table, a few hastily lit candles, and a sloppy "sorry" scribbled inside a card. I smiled, but the emptiness inside was something nothing could ever fill. In my senior year of high school, I was chosen to be on the team representing our school at the state science competition. My project, an AI-based model for waste classification, won first place. On the day I was to be honored at the city hall, I invited my parents to attend. But that morning, they texted me saying Sarah had a mild cold, and they didn't feel right leaving her home alone, so they wouldn't be able to come. I stood on stage, looking out at the audience, trying not to let my eyes search for familiar faces. While I was receiving my award, my parents were probably sitting in the living room watching television with Sarah, as if my achievement was just a quick blurb scrolling past in the local paper. Things like that didn't happen just once or twice. It happened so often that I eventually learned not to expect anything from them. If I wanted to join an extra class, I had to find my own scholarships or take on a part-time job to cover the cost. I knew very well that if I didn't stand on my own, no one would be there to pull me up. That was also what made me mature faster than my peers. I knew how to budget, how to apply for research grants, how to email professors to ask for internship opportunities. But deep down, I was still a child who longed to hear my parents say, "We're proud of you." I wasn't someone who wore my emotions on my sleeve. My friends often said I was strong, composed, always knowing what I want and how to get it. They didn't know that most of the time, I was just trying to hide the feeling of being left out. I remember once, in 11th grade, my homeroom teacher pulled me aside after class and asked why she never saw my parents at parent-teacher meetings. I just smiled and said, "They're busy," then turned away quickly to hide the sting in my eyes. The truth was, they were never too busy to spend an evening with me. They just didn't think it was as important as taking Sarah to dance practice or attending one of her school plays. I used to wonder if I had done something wrong. Was I too quiet, or not interesting enough to catch their attention? But as I grew older, I realized the problem was never me. I simply wasn't part of the script they had written for our family, a script where Sarah was always the main character, and I was just a supporting role who showed up occasionally to fill the gaps. That made me more determined than ever to write my own story, one where I would be the main character, whether they chose to read it or not. That's why I chose to attend the University of Washington, over an hour away from home, far enough for me to live independently, yet still within driving distance if necessary. The day I received my acceptance letter along with a full scholarship, I thought my parents would be proud. Instead, their reaction was a nod and the words, "Good, that means we don't have to worry about paying for your tuition." No celebratory dinner, no congratulatory card. I still remember walking alone to a coffee shop near home, ordering a latte, and sitting there all afternoon, reading and rereading that acceptance letter, trying to convince myself that this was enough. With everything I had been through, I thought I had learned how not to let it get to me anymore. But deep down, I still hoped that one day, on some truly important occasion, they would show up and look at me as if I, too, deserved the same love and recognition Sarah always received. That was exactly why graduation day meant so much to me, and why that text on the morning of it felt like a knife slicing into a part of me I had spent years trying to mend. When I started my freshman year of college, I believed things would change. Getting into the University of Washington with a full scholarship was the result of years of relentless studying and complete self-reliance. The scholarship covered tuition and part of my living expenses, but to live more comfortably and afford books, I had to find a part-time job from my very first semester. I was fortunate enough to be hired in the Artificial Intelligence Research Lab within the Computer Science Department. In the beginning, my tasks were simple data entry, spreadsheet management, assisting graduate students with small projects. But to me, it was a doorway into a whole new world. I often stayed in the lab until late at night, working while quietly learning how to write algorithms and optimize models. Some nights, I left the building after midnight, walking through empty streets with the chill from Puget Sound seeping in, forcing me to pull my coat tighter. But instead of feeling exhausted, I felt a quiet warmth inside, because here, at least, the effort I put in would be recognized. Throughout my 4 years in college, I never received any financial support from my family beyond a few token gifts during holidays, a wool scarf for Christmas, sometimes a birthday card with a $20 bill tucked inside. I knew they weren't struggling financially, they just never thought about giving me the best of what they had. Money, time, attention. All of it was reserved for Sarah. Every time I called home, most of the conversation would revolve around her. Sarah just got into the photography club. Sarah's going on a trip with her friends. Sarah's thinking about buying a new car. My parents would talk on and on, their voices brimming with pride. When it was my turn to be asked about, it was always with short, polite questions. School going okay? Work still fine? And then, just as quickly, they would steer the conversation back to Sarah. I once thought the 100-mile distance between home and school would help me escape the feeling of being left out, but instead, that distance only made one truth clearer. We were living in two entirely different worlds. Every now and then, I still tried to keep a connection by sending Sarah birthday gifts. I would choose things I knew she liked: a vintage film camera, a set of fashion photography books, or the sneakers she had once mentioned wanting. She would reply with a short thanks and sometimes a few photos. But those gifts didn't change anything. I didn't send them to get something in return, I sent them because a part of me still wanted to believe the bond between us as sisters was somehow still there. College life was anything but easy, but it taught me more than any lecture ever could. I learned how to juggle full-time classes, nearly 20 hours of part-time work each week, and participation in research projects. I learned how to stretch every dollar, to take advantage of every scholarship and grant available. Once, I applied to attend a tech conference in San Francisco but couldn't afford the plane ticket. I emailed the organizers, explained my situation, and asked if they could help cover my travel expenses. They agreed. That trip became a turning point, opening doors for me to meet people in the industry and even receive an invitation to collaborate on a startup project. Even as these achievements kept coming, they rarely came up in family calls. I still remember one evening, after my research group launched an AI application that got featured in the local paper, I called home to share the news. My mother simply said, that's good. Oh, did you know Sarah was just elected vice president of the photography club? Her response was like a bucket of cold water, and I realized I had stopped expecting recognition from them. Instead, I sought it elsewhere in the proud gaze of my advisor, in a colleague's firm handshake, and in the quiet satisfaction of knowing I had done good work. 4 years passed so quickly I barely noticed until graduation day was around the corner. Looking back, I saw that I had built a completely independent life, paying my own rent, covering my own meals, and even saving up a small nest egg. But at the same time, I realized the distance between my family and me had never been greater. We no longer argued, nor did we debate. Our relationship had cooled into something like a room closed off all winter, silent and without warmth. I started preparing for graduation weeks in advance. The school sent each honors student a set of VIP guest tickets for seats right in front of the stage, the perfect spot to see every handshake with the dean, every photo taken in the moment of receiving the diploma. My mind went immediately to my parents. This could be one of those rare occasions where we would sit together, not around a tense family dinner table, but in a formal setting where my achievements would be witnessed and acknowledged. I emailed them the campus map, marked the parking areas, noted the meeting times, and even suggested nearby coffee shops if they wanted to arrive early. My mother replied briefly, "We'll be there, proud of you." Just those last 3 words were enough to warm me a little, as if the distance of the past 4 years was finally narrowing. The day before graduation, I was busy almost nonstop. In the morning, I tried on my gown again, making sure the cap fit perfectly and the tassel wasn't crooked. At noon, I stopped by the research lab to deliver a thank you gift to my advisor, a handwritten card and a box of his favorite coffee. That evening, I called home to confirm the schedule, and my mother's voice was bright with excitement. "Don't worry, we'll get there early tomorrow. Sarah's coming too, to celebrate with you." For the first time in what felt like forever, I smiled genuinely, picturing us all sitting in the front row, Sarah holding a bouquet, my parents waving as I walked across the stage. But the next morning, just as I stepped out of the shower with my hair still damp, my phone buzzed. A text from my mother lit up the screen. "Sweetie, Sarah just got her new apartment and needs to move in right away. We have to help her. Please understand, we'll celebrate later." I froze, water dripping from my hair onto the cold floor. I read it once, then again, but none of the words changed. They had canceled. Canceled on the very day I had been waiting for over 4 years, because Sarah needed to move. It wasn't an emergency, it wasn't life or death just moving. The first feeling wasn't anger, it was like being slapped hard by an invisible hand. Not physically painful, but a cold rush shot down my spine, making it hard to take a deep breath. Dozens of reasons flashed through my mind for why they could be here today, but one by one they fell away, leaving only the bare truth. I wasn't their priority, and maybe I never would be. I set the phone down on the table, willing my hands not to shake. No tears. I had promised myself that no matter what happened, I wouldn't cry today. I put on my gown, adjusted my cap, and looked in the mirror one last time. Staring back was a 4-year-old woman with slightly red eyes, but her chin held high. If they weren't going to come, I would go myself. If they weren't going to witness this, I would witness it for myself. When I arrived on campus, the sky was just as clear as it had been the day before. Students and their families were already gathering near the entrances, posing for photos in front of large banners that read, "Congratulations, class of." I walked past groups laughing and chatting, clutching my VIP tickets but knowing I wouldn't use them for anyone but myself. In the student seating area, I saw my friends posing with their families. Andrew, my research partner, stood between his parents and younger brother, holding a bouquet of sunflowers. Maria, my classmate from the AI program, was wrapped in a tight hug from her mother while her father snapped photo after photo. As I approached, they all smiled and greeted me, but I noticed their eyes flick briefly to the empty space behind me. No one asked outright, but the absence was enough to create a strange tension, as if everyone was afraid to brush against a wound that had just been reopened. "Where are your parents?" Maria asked quietly as we lined up to take our seats. I pressed my lips together and said lightly, "Busy with something." She nodded, didn't push further, but I could see the pity in her eyes. And that, somehow, bothered me even more than being left behind because I didn't want to be the main character in someone else's pity story. The ceremony began, the music swelling brightly. The parents section in front was packed with beaming faces, cameras, and phones held high. I glanced at the VIP area. 3 seats I had reserved still sat empty. On the middle chair, a paper sign that read, "Carter Family," had been blown to the floor by the wind. I bent down to pick it up, placed it neatly back on the seat out of reflex, then sat up straight. Because if I let myself slump, I was afraid I might not get back up. Throughout the ceremony, I made sure my eyes never lingered too long on any parent's face. Each time a student's name was called, cheers and bursts of confetti erupted, and I imagined the silence that would fall when it was my turn. But instead of fear, something else began to take shape inside me, a steadiness. They weren't here, but I was. And that was enough to carry me through the rest of the day, until the moment I had no idea would change everything. I was seated in the very first row, the section reserved for the top graduates. From there, I had a clear view of the stage, framed by deep blue velvet curtains, a polished podium with a gleaming microphone, and, behind it, a massive LED screen projecting each graduate's face as they stepped up to receive their diploma. The soft lighting washed gently over our row, just enough to feel the formality of the moment, just enough to reveal the faint tremor in hands clenched in anticipation. I held my name card tightly, as if it were an anchor keeping me steady in the swirling tide of emotions. The ceremony unfolded in its familiar order. Brief speeches from the board, congratulatory words from the student representative, and then the roll call of names. The dean, a man in his 60s with silver hair and kind eyes, stood at the podium, his warm baritone carrying through the speakers. "And now, we will recognize this year's outstanding graduates." How? My friends' names were called one by one. Each name brought a wave of applause, a brilliant smile, a family leaping to their feet in celebration. I watched Andrew walk across the stage, his parents springing up, phones raised high, faces glowing with pride. I saw Maria accept her diploma, her mother clutching a bouquet nearly half her size, grinning so broadly that even I felt warmed by it. Then, as the applause faded, the dean lifted his gaze toward my row. He paused for a beat, smiled, and I felt my heartbeat quicken. His voice came through more slowly, more clearly than before. "And finally, we are honored to announce that, Emily Carter." A ripple of silence spread, as if everyone had paused to listen for what came next. Valedictorian of the computer science program, who, along with her research team, developed an artificial intelligence software recently licensed by Microsoft for $2.5 million. For a second, I couldn't believe I'd heard it right. The entire hall erupted in applause and whistles, and I saw dozens of arms raised, holding cameras and phones. On the LED screen behind the stage, my face filled the frame, my smile still calm, but my eyes glimmering with something that was equal parts pride and trembling. I caught the murmurs around me. "Wow, she's the valedictorian? $2.5 million? No way. Microsoft, no less." I rose to my feet, taking each step up the stairs to the stage. The ceremonial music played, but all I could hear was the thud of my heartbeat and the rush of blood in my ears. When my hand met the dean's, he gave it a firm shake, bowed his head slightly, and said just loud enough for me to hear, "You've done very well, Emily." "Very well," I answered with a smile, steadying my voice as I thanked him. Camera flashes went off in quick succession as I accepted my diploma, my photo with the dean captured from multiple angles. I turned to face the audience, looking toward the guest section. My 3 VIP seats were still empty. In that moment, I could feel the distance and invisible chasm between me and the people who should have been my proudest spectators. But instead of letting it swallow me, I took a deep breath, lifted the corners of my mouth, and bowed as if this entire hall were my family. As I stepped down, colleagues from the research lab, the people I considered my brothers and sisters, stood to applaud, cheering my name. A few professors nodded in congratulations, their eyes shining sincerely. I knew they weren't just happy about my achievement, they understood how hard I had worked to earn it. The local news station's camera swept across my face, then zoomed in, catching my smile and my gaze. I heard someone whisper behind me, "She's so composed. If it were me, I'd be crying by now." They didn't know that inside, my emotions were surging like a shoreline before a storm. Not because of the $2.5 million, though of course that number mattered, but because this was the first time in my life my accomplishment had been publicly acknowledged, and no one could take that away from me. As the ceremony went on, I sat back in my seat, my hand resting lightly on the diploma. For every round of applause given to other graduates, I returned a smile, but my mind kept returning to that moment when my name had been called with those words of introduction. It wasn't just an announcement, it was a confirmation. That even without a single member of my family present, I was capable, I was worthy, and I had earned the recognition of the entire hall. I didn't know if my parents and Sarah were watching the live broadcast from home. Part of me hoped they were, so they could see that I had achieved something they had never believed I could. But another part of me no longer cared because the recognition I had needed, I had just received, from my own effort and journey. When the ceremony ended, students began tossing their caps into the air, cheers echoing across the campus. I tilted my head back, watching thousands of golden tassels spin against the vivid blue sky. One cap landed right at my feet, and I picked it up, smiling. I didn't know who it belonged to, but in that moment, it felt like I had found the final missing piece to the picture I'd been assembling for the past 4 years, a picture of an Emily Carter who no longer needed anyone standing beside her to feel validated. My friends rushed over, hugging me, handing me bouquets, showering me with praise. Andrew clapped me on the shoulder. "Emily, you've made the whole team proud. I'm blasting this all over LinkedIn." Maria handed me a small gift box. "It's nothing big, just something to remember today." I opened it to find a fountain pen engraved with my name, a simple gift that tightened my throat. Professors came by one after another to shake my hand and offer congratulations. Professor Miller, who had mentored me throughout my 4 years, held onto my hand a little longer. "Emily," he said in his warm, steady voice, "today you proved that every bit of your effort was worth it. Whether anyone is here or not, your value doesn't change." His words felt like an invisible coat against Seattle's cool air, wrapping me in a warmth I never expected to receive from someone outside my family. Before I could leave campus, my phone buzzed nonstop. When I opened it, there were hundreds of messages from friends, colleagues, even acquaintances I barely knew online. They sent screenshots from the ceremony, tagged me in posts filled with congratulations. Amid all those notifications, I saw one message from Mom and Dad. I froze for a moment, my heart sinking slightly before I opened it. The message was short: "Congratulations, let's talk." I stood still for a few seconds, staring at the words as if they held some hidden meaning. "Let's talk," a phrase that sounded like it could open a door or spring a trap. I sat down on a nearby bench, took a deep breath, and typed a short reply. "When?" They answered almost immediately. "Tonight, can we video call?" That evening, after leaving a small celebration with my research team, I returned to my apartment, made a cup of hot tea, and opened my laptop. My parents' faces appeared on the screen. They didn't look nearly as tired as I'd imagined. My mother spoke first. "We're sorry we couldn't be there today. Your sister, Sarah, she got the keys to her apartment earlier than expected. You know how it is, moving everything in one day isn't easy." I stayed silent, listening to them explain. My father chimed in, "But we watched the ceremony online. You really surprised us. We're proud of you." If those words had come years earlier, I might have cried. But now, they felt more like polite small talk than genuine acknowledgement. Before I could respond, my mother continued, "There's something we'd like to ask. You know Sarah is still figuring out her path, and now you have that big sum from the software. What do you think about helping her start a business? Just a portion, as an investment in the family. Your sister deserves a good start, and you've made more than enough." I sat there, saying nothing, listening to the ticking of the wall clock in my room. Part of me wasn't surprised. I'd always known this day would come, but hearing them say it outright felt like an old door slamming in a gust of wind, sending every memory rushing back. I remembered the forgotten birthdays, the award ceremonies no one attended, the gifts I sent Sarah that were never met with genuine care in return. And now, at the height of my biggest achievement, they still saw me as a resource to funnel toward Sarah. I set my tea down, straightened my back, and said slowly, "I understand what you're asking. But that money is the result of 4 years of working day and night, figuring out everything on my own, without a single dollar from the family. I chose to live this way because I knew I wasn't your priority. And today, hearing this request, it shows me nothing has really changed." My mother frowned. "Are you blaming us? We're just thinking of Sarah. She's never been independent like you. She needs help." My father forced a weak smile. "We're family, helping each other is normal." I nodded slightly. Yes, helping each other is normal. But helping each other doesn't mean sacrificing one person to lift up another forever. I've done my part and now, I'm setting boundaries for myself. That statement left their side of the screen quiet for a few seconds. I could see my mother searching for words, while my father let out a long sigh. "So, what's your decision?" he asked. I smiled faintly, but my gaze was steady. "I will not invest my money in any project I don't believe in. And if Sarah wants to start a business, I'm more than willing to offer her advice, connections, or guidance on a business plan. But money? I'm keeping that for my own projects." They didn't answer right away. My mother glanced at my father, then said quietly, "We'll talk later." And the call ended. I sat there in front of the dark screen, feeling both a sense of loss and relief. Loss, because I knew the distance between us would only grow longer. Relief, because I had finally drawn a clear boundary. I had chosen myself not out of anger, but out of resolve. And for the first time, I felt truly grown, no longer the daughter constantly seeking acceptance from people who were never going to give it to me. I spent the rest of that night thinking about the conversation we'd just had. At first, I considered letting it go, letting things drift the way they always had. But this time felt different. There was no vague, aching hurt like in high school, no quiet yearning for them to change. Instead, there was absolute clarity. If I stayed silent, this cycle would never end. I opened my laptop, sat before the blank screen, and began typing. The email to my parents wasn't a letter of blame, nor was it an indictment. I kept my tone polite but firm. I thanked them for bringing me into this world, for giving me the foundation to start my life. I acknowledged that because of them, I had learned to be independent, to stand on my own without relying on anyone. But I also made it clear that I would no longer accept being placed below anyone else in the family, and I would not allow love to be turned into an endless comparison. I emphasized that from now on, every decision about my finances, career, or time would be made according to my own values and priorities, not to make up for any favoritism. When I hit send, a strange sensation washed over me, part relief, part the feeling of having closed the door on a long, exhausting chapter. I knew they wouldn't be happy. They might even be angry. But that no longer made me hesitate. A month later, I packed my bags and left Seattle for San Francisco. Microsoft had officially invited me to join their commercial AI development team, an opportunity I knew I had to take. My new apartment in Mission Bay was smaller than I expected, but it was filled with light and overlooked the bay. In the mornings, I walked through streets lined with coffee shops, blending into the flow of people rushing toward tech offices. Every time I stepped into Microsoft's headquarters, I felt certain I was exactly where I belonged, not because of the company's prestige, but because here, I was seen for my true abilities. The new job demanded long hours and intense focus, but I didn't let myself live solely around commercial projects. One Saturday afternoon, I happened to read an article about the percentage of women in tech, and it brought me back to my freshman days navigating a lab full of men, always feeling like I had to work twice as hard just to be heard. I decided to join a nonprofit dedicated to helping high school girls gain access to STEM programs. At first, I contributed only a few hours of mentoring each month, but gradually, I discovered a particular joy in watching these young women grow more confident after each session. I taught them how to code, how to present their projects, and most importantly, how to believe in their own worth. Each time I stood in front of that group, I realized I was doing what I had once wished someone would do for me, becoming a living example that you don't need anyone's permission to step into rooms you once thought were reserved for others. That gave me a deeper sense of fulfillment than any compliment from my family ever had. In San Francisco, I began redefining family on my own terms. It was the colleagues who always had my back when a project hit a snag, the gym friends who invited me to run along the bay every Sunday morning, the girls in the mentorship program who called me Miss Emily with sparkling eyes. I gradually understood that my worth had nothing to do with whether my parents recognized it or not. My worth lived in every line of code I wrote, every idea I contributed, and every person I helped believe in themselves. Once in a while, my parents still sent messages, short, polite, mostly surface level. They no longer brought up borrowing money or helping Sarah, but the distance was still there, silent and undeniable. I no longer tried to erase that distance because I had come to understand that some relationships would never heal the way you want them to. And the best thing you can do is keep them at a safe distance so they can't hurt you again. One late night, as I looked out the apartment window at the city lights reflecting off the water, I found myself wondering, if they had been there on graduation day, would anything be different? Probably not. Because real change hadn't come from them, it had come from my decision. The decision to step out of the old cycle, to define my own worth, and to live a life where I was in the driver's seat. And for the first time in years, I felt at peace with myself. One late afternoon, with the week's work finally wrapped up, I stepped out onto the balcony of my new apartment. The wind from the San Francisco Bay carried the salty tang of the sea, tugging gently at my hair and making the hem of my light jacket ripple. In the distance, the Golden Gate Bridge rose through a thin veil of mist, the sunset washing it in a warm shade of orange that shimmered across the rippling water. I leaned against the railing, took a sip of hot mint tea, and let my eyes drift across the view. For some reason, the moment stirred up a flood of memories. I thought of my 16th birthday, with a cold cake and a hastily written sorry card left on the kitchen table. I thought of the day I received the State Science Award, standing alone on stage, looking out at rows of empty guest seats. I thought of that morning on graduation day, when the text, "Sarah needs to move," ended all hope of a reunion. Those images had once felt like sharp blades, each recollection tightening my chest. But today, when they returned, they didn't cut as deep. There was still a faint heaviness, but it felt more like looking at an old scar you remember it once hurt, but the pain now belongs to the past. I realized I was no longer that girl waiting for my parents to show up so I could feel worthy. I had stepped out of that role not by retaliating, not by proving them wrong, but by building a life I genuinely wanted. Back in Seattle, I used to think my victory would come the day my parents had to acknowledge me and apologize. But now, staring at the Golden Gate Bridge glowing in the sunset, I knew the truth was different. I hadn't won because they lost. I'd won because I no longer needed their permission to live in alignment with my own worth. Recognition from others, while meaningful, was no longer the sole foundation I stood on. I had found that foundation within myself in the long hours at the research lab, in the confident eyes of the young women I mentored, in every project I poured my heart into. I closed my eyes, drew in a deep breath of the cool air, and felt a stillness settle over me. Not the empty stillness of loneliness, but the peace of knowing I was in the right place, at the right time, on the right path. I knew the old memories would still return sometimes, and there would be moments when I wished things had been different. But they no longer had the power to define me. The sun dipped lower, its final rays wrapping around the bridge's graceful curve before giving way to night and the golden glow of its lights. I set my teacup down, still leaning against the railing, and smiled, not the smile of someone who had defeated anyone, but the smile of someone who had finally found herself, after a long journey of loss, learning, and healing. One early autumn evening, I was invited to be a guest on a television talk show about women in tech. Before the program began, the host asked if I wanted to rehearse my answers, but I shook my head. I already knew what I would say, not a script, but the truth I had lived. When the stage lights came up, I sat tall, looked straight into the camera, and began to tell my story. I spoke about a girl who grew up in a family where love always came with conditions. About birthdays that were forgotten, awards no one came to see, and a graduation day where 3 VIP seats sat empty in a crowded hall. I shared how I left Seattle for San Francisco, began my career at Microsoft, and found a new kind of family in a community of people who believed in and supported one another. I talked about joining community projects to help young girls step into STEM, not just because I loved technology, but because I knew what it felt like to fight to be heard. When the host asked, "What's the biggest lesson you've learned?" I looked straight into the camera and answered slowly. Recognition is not something you beg for, you create it and you give it to yourself. If you only wait for others to see you, you'll stay stuck in a race for acceptance. But if you give yourself value, no one can take it away. The studio went silent for a few seconds before the applause broke out in waves. I knew I had said something many people needed to hear, because I had once needed to hear it myself. I left a message for the viewers. If you've ever been overlooked, ever placed beneath someone else, remember that you are still enough simply because you exist. No one has the right to decide your worth but you. And sometimes, walking away from toxic relationships isn't turning your back on family, it's turning back toward yourself. When the program ended, I shook the host's hand, thanked the crew, and stepped out of the studio. Outside, the San Francisco sky had shifted to a deep violet. I got into my car, started the engine, and drove toward the Golden Gate Bridge. The last traces of sunset still lingered, casting the water in brilliant shades of gold and orange. The ocean wind rushed in through the window, carrying with it the scent of salt and freedom. As the car rolled across the bridge's spans, I caught my reflection in the windshield, eyes no longer searching for approval anywhere else, only the steady gaze of someone who knows she's on the right path. I smiled, keeping my hands firm on the wheel. Ahead, the road stretched on, not as a destination, but as a new journey, one where I chose the direction, wrote my own story, and lived by the worth I had found. And this time, I knew I didn't need anyone's permission.